So it's been a while since I've made one of these videos. I've actually been working on another project, which I can't talk about much right now, but that's taken a lot of time in the last year. But now I'm back to making some of these videos about how to make a micro budget movie. And we're gonna finally get to part 2 of what I wish I'd known before I made my first movie. And what I wish I'd have known more about has to do with sound, okay? Now, let me just check. Okay, my sound is recording, I think. So first off, it's pretty simple, is one, pay attention to the sound. I know that should seem obvious, but of course we knew we were supposed to pay attention to the sound. When you get to the set, it's gonna happen. You're gonna be thinking more about the visual and how the camera is set up and where the camera looking and all that kind of stuff. You're gonna be thinking more about that than the sound. It's really easy to forget. And part of that is because you will have no problem finding people who can operate a camera and want to operate a camera. People who want to be people who want to be finding people who want to be finding people who want to be cinematographers. But you're gonna have trouble finding people who want to be sound recordists. There's just not as many people into it. So if you want to make yourself valuable on a set, become a sound recordist, learn about sound. And it is amazing. I think it's just as interesting as the camera stuff, but I don't know, people they just don't pay attention to it. It is very difficult to find somebody who is into sound, somebody who wants to be the sound recordist. There are not a lot of people who just, who are focusing on that, who are putting their attention into that, who really study that. So it's really hard to find somebody to help you with your sound. So, one thing this means is if you do want to get into film making, one of the best things I think that you could probably focus on is sound. You're not going to have as much competition if you're good at sound, especially when it comes to sound editing and to the re-recording or whatever they call that kind of stuff. So pay attention to your sound, and if at all possible, find yourself somebody who really cares about it, who's passionate about it. They don't have to be necessarily the greatest expert, but they care about it and they want to do as good a job as they possibly can do. We had a guy lined up, but then our budget didn't turn out what we had hoped it was going to be, and we lost him. And so we just thought, well, we got the equipment, we'll find somebody to do it, and it was always just, it was a lot of times some of the same guys, but it was just whoever we could find to hold that mic. And there were some days where we definitely did not pay anywhere close to the attention we should have. It was always just something that was secondary, and as a result, we had some days that were horrible sound, and practically unusable, which resulted in having to do ADR, which as much as possible, you probably will have to do some ADR, but as much as possible, it's good to avoid having to do ADR. Because if you're making a micro budget movie, you're not going to have a lot of time. You may have trouble getting those actors back, and you're probably not going to have the setup and the equipment to do ADR easily. So you want to try to avoid that. And that means you need to be getting the best possible sound on the day that you can get. So that leads to what kind of equipment you should be using. So we used lavalier mics, we used shotgun mics, we used some other mics that we definitely should not have used, so they don't even merit mentioning. That's sort of the problem. There was some days where we just did not properly mic things. As a result, on my second movie, I paid a whole lot more attention to sound. So we first of all, we used a 32-bit sound, and I think that is a good idea because it just gives you more room for error. You're not having to worry about your sound levels quite as much. It's not that you can completely ignore your sound level, I don't think, but you don't have to worry about it quite as much. So 32-bit sound. Okay, then we're using a shotgun mic all the time, and having somebody who knows what they're doing, monitoring the sound all the time, so we know that we're getting good sound as much as possible. And then using lavalier mics. So that's one of the things I learned from the first one is if you have a couple actors, and especially if you're going to be a distance from them, they're moving around a lot, there's action, there's a lot of ambient noise, and that could be you know, a river or a water running, or that could be cars driving by, things like that. As much as possible, you want lav mics on each one of those actors, in addition to the shotgun mic. I do think that a shotgun mic sounds better because you get more of a sense of the environment. You get more of it just, to me, it has a better sound quality, but the lav mic is going to get you that dialogue as clean as possible. And often you're going to combine the lav and the shotgun mic together for your final mix. Okay, and then what if you do have to do some ADR, which we still had to do some ADR even on the second movie I just did. Not nearly as much as the first, but I still had to do some. Because we don't have the setup of a studio, to me, the best way to get the ADR is to go back to the spot or a similar kind of environment where the scene took place. That way, you're going to get the same kind of atmosphere in the voice because the mic is going to pick up that sound. ADR really stands out when it's very obvious that the direction that the sound is coming from and the space that the voice is in is not the same as the scene, and that will make it stand out. So as much as possible, just try to get that ADR in the same space with the same microphone from the same direction where the actor is supposed to be. Now, if the original sound is recorded by river, you don't have to be near a river, but you do want to be outside. You're going to add a different river sound that's going to cover over everything else later, so that doesn't have to be there. But just the same sort of basic tone. You want the same tone of sound. Now, along those same kinds of lines, when it comes to the environmental kinds of sounds, room tone, you want to get your room tone, get that minute of silence. It's really helpful to have that. Maybe you have some sort of thing like a fire, you know, the crackling of the fire, a river running, feet walking on the ground, clothes, all this kind of stuff. You want to get those things separate without somebody talking so that you can then add that in later to create that background sound, to add those little environmental kinds of sounds. Now, if the actor is doing something where they are rustling around with a bag or something like that, and you don't have special prop bags that don't make sound, you want to get them doing that audio when they're not rustling the bag, so you got a good clean audio there as much as possible. And you as the director will probably have to do some of this yourself later, is you're going to have to go back to certain spots, and you're going to have to get those sounds later, those environmental sounds, those prop sounds, all that kind of stuff. You're probably going to have to do some of that on your own because you're probably not going to have time to get it all on the day. on the day, as much as possible, you want to focus on getting the dialogue as clean as possible. Quick tip, I mean, you make whatever movie you want to make, but if you are making a movie and you want it to, and you don't have a lot of money, easiest thing to do would be that it's okay that you hear cars, you hear planes flying over. Making an apocalyptic movie where a lot of these sounds are not supposed to be in the background makes it a lot more difficult. But anyways, great example of this, Florida Project. There's a helicopter. Helicopter tours are landing right outside of the hotel where they're filming. And they did not have the money to say, oh no, we're just gonna shut that down. They had to deal with the fact that the helicopter is going to be landing and taking off over and over and over again as they're trying to shoot their movie. So they work that into the movie. They make sure you see the helicopter lands. They shoot scenes where the helicopter is landing and taking off in the background. So it just makes sense that you're hearing that sound. So that certainly makes things easier. Okay, finally we come to sound mixing, sound editing, and that final sound mixing. One thing I wish I'd have known about is you are going to have to pay somebody to do that final mix. And you may ask yourself, why do I have to spend a lot of money? And it is not going to be cheap. For us, my first movie, the sound mix cost nearly as much as the production budget. And that was with the guy giving us a really good deal. But he did a great job, and it's important. This is why you want to spend so much time trying to get the best possible sound you can get, is because if you do a good job, very few people are going to notice, but that's a good thing, because if you do a bad job, everybody's going to notice, and it is going to make your movie look cheap if your sound is bad. You can get away with some bad visuals, but you really cannot get away with bad sound. So again, if you want to get into the movie industry, becoming a sound mixer and a sound editor, I'm going to guess there's not as much competition as that as there are in other jobs, and it's really, really important. It's really, really valuable, and you can't get away without having somebody do that for you. So since you're gonna have to pay somebody to do this, you want to prepare your edit as best as possible for them to make it as easy and as quick as possible for them to do the final edit and the final mix. You need to be able to send your sound to them in basically 3 parts: your dialogue, your sound effects and sound design, and your music. Those have to be separate, and so when you're doing your edit, you have to have, you're gonna end up with a ton of tracks, but you're gonna have your dialogue all in separate tracks, and each person, as much as possible, in their own track. You're gonna have your sound effects in separate tracks, and then you're gonna have your sound design, and then you're gonna have your music and your environmental sounds. All that kind of stuff is gonna be all separated out into separate sections for them to be able to work with separately. And also it makes it so that you can send them those files in a way that they can work with them easily. Finally, I will, talking about sound design, talking about music, I'm gonna make a separate video about that. I will simply say it can cover up a lot of mistakes. So it'll be its own separate video. Thanks.